The Impressionist movement was driven by the desire to capture ephemeral moments, but it was also driven by advancements in pigment technology. This is a painting that I think really encapsulates everything that is so exciting about the Impressionist movement. It's the product of a colour palette in transition, shaped by the industrial advancements of the 19th century. Hello, I'm Evie Hatch. I'm an art historian specialising in the history of artist pigments. And today I'm talking about the Gare St-Lazare by Claude Monet. We'll look at how Monet used a spectrum of pigments to capture the steam and smoke-filled atmosphere of this Parisian train station. In January 1877, Monet was granted permission from the railway authorities to work on site at the Gare St-Lazare, which was one of Paris's largest and busiest train stations. And what emerged over the next 4 months was a series of 12 paintings made in and around the station, including this one, which is simply called the Gare St-Lazare. So here Monet has set up his easel in front of the terminus of one of the main lines, looking towards the waiting trains. There are passengers standing on the platform, maybe waiting to board, and framing the composition at the top is the iron and glass roof, which contains the clouds of vapour billowing from the two engines. And we have here the contrast between the rigidity of the infrastructure, so the iron frame and the girders, with the ephemeral quality of the steam, which Monet has captured with swirling brushstrokes. In the middle distance is the low grey shape of the Pont de l'Europe, the Bridge of Europe, under which you can see white puffs of steam emerging which announce the arrival or departure of another train. One thing which I think is really key to understanding the world of this painting is just how loud steam-powered train travel really was. When we think of clouds in Monet's work, we probably most immediately think of his landscapes. We think of those silent clouds, like those he painted in the sky behind poplars on the Epte. But in the Gare St-Lazare, the clouds of smoke and vapour would have been accompanied by hissing and puffing. While he painted, Monet would have heard the shrieks of steam whistles, the chugging of engines, the clatter of trains on tracks. The contemporary critic Baron Grimm actually remarked on Monet's ability to convey the disagreeable impression that results when several locomotives whistle at the same time. And that really speaks to Monet's success in translating sound into the language of paint. The Paris shown here is truly an urban landscape. It's full of noise and steam. And Monet has described the smoke and the vapour and the sky with the same fluffy brushstrokes. And the effect is a kind of blurring between the sky and steam and the sense that one is melting into the other. At first glance, the urban landscape that Monet has described is full of grey and brown and black, which feels kind of totally in keeping with our idea of coal-fuelled industrial modernity. But a close examination of the Gare St-Lazare reveals that beneath the grey and the black is actually a shimmering spectrum of colour. So let's look at what pigment analysis tells us about Monet's colour palette. Pigments are chemical compounds that produce colour, and they're one of the building blocks of paintings. And we can use chemical analysis to tell us what pigments an artist has used. What pigment analysis shows is that Monet's palette in the Gare St-Lazare contains mostly blue, green, red, and white. Some of those pigments are historic. They'd been on the artist's palette for centuries, while others were at the cutting edge of 19th century pigment technology. It's this mixture of old and new that makes Monet's palette here really, really exciting. One of the oldest pigments in this painting is lead white, which is a lead carbonate pigment. And for centuries, it was essentially the only white pigment used in European oil painting. In the Gare St-Lazare, Monet has used it in mixtures to create those various pale greys. And he's also brushed it on undiluted in those fluffy white clouds of steam on the left. Another really, really ancient pigment is vermilion, and this is a bright red mercury sulfide pigment, and it's really, really important in the history of European art. You could walk through the National Gallery and find it in the very earliest works, like Giotto's Pentecost, up until the 19th century in paintings like Degas' La Coiffure. In the Gare St-Lazare, Monet has applied it in little touches to the people on the platform. Alongside the hot orange red of vermilion, Monet has also used darker, more cherry reds, and these are red lake pigments. Lake pigments are colours produced from red dyes like madder or cochineal, and you can see a streak of ruby red lake marking the edge of the roof beam on the right-hand side. So lead white, vermilion and red lake pigments had been used for hundreds of years. At this point they were tried and tested staples of the artist's palette, but other pigments that Monet's used here were very, very new in his time. Over the 19th century, new pigments were being introduced at an astonishingly rapid rate thanks to advancements in industrial chemistry. And some of the products of this innovation can be found in the Gare St-Lazare. Two of them are green pigments, viridian and emerald green. Emerald green was an acetoarsenite pigment. It was developed at the very beginning of the 19th century. In French, it became known as vert veronese, Veronese green, referring to the 16th century Italian painter Paolo Veronese. It was an extremely vibrant green, which is what attracted Impressionist painters to it. And you can see how intense it is in Cézanne's hillside in Provence, where he used it undiluted. But in contrast to that, in the Gare St-Lazare, Monet has employed it in a much more subdued way, and he's mixed it in with other pigments. Viridian was an even newer addition to the artist's palette. It's a green pigment composed of hydrated chromium oxide, and it was first prepared in 1838, but it really began to take off as an artist's pigment in the middle of the 19th century. Monet used it in his palette really frequently. He used it in bathers at La Granger, where he used it to mix the green in the boats. And you can actually see a very, very similar blue-green in the lamps that line the station in the Gare St-Lazare. Alongside these modern greens, Monet has used three modern blue pigments. There's cobalt blue. This is a cobalt and aluminium oxide invented in 1802. It was very expensive, but it was a very important pigment in Impressionist painting. The second blue is cerulean blue. This was introduced to artist paints in the 1860s. It's also a cobalt-based blue. It's a compound of cobalt and tin oxides. Monet used both cobalt and cerulean blue to mix the blue-greys in the clouds of steam in the Gare St-Lazare. The third blue is really interesting. The third is synthetic ultramarine blue, and this pigment is what really exemplifies the shift from the traditional to the modern industrial palette. Historically, ultramarine blue was extracted from lapis lazuli, and that was mined in Afghanistan. It was one of the most, if not the most, expensive pigment, often reserved for really important subjects, most famously the Virgin Mary's robes. It's a pigment that often took centre stage in a painting. Think of the Wilton diptych. This is a piece which is bathed in ultramarine blue. It's been used very conspicuously, very intentionally, as an expression of not only the importance of the subject, but also the wealth of the patron. However, in the 1820s, a process for making synthetic ultramarine blue was developed, and it could now be produced in a factory for a fraction of the price. And this is an incredible shift. What was once the most costly and precious colour became one of the cheapest and most widely available. Monet has really embraced this innovation in the Gare St-Lazare. He has used ultramarine blue not conspicuously as it had been in the past, but very, very subtly, blending it in with other colours to create depth and atmosphere. Hidden within mixtures, it contributes to the rich shadows and shimmering greys of the train station. This approach was possible due to the accessibility of synthetic pigments. So the Gare St-Lazare is not just a painting of industrial modernity. Its very colour palette reflects the technological advancements that shaped both industry and Impressionist art. It's also really interesting to note what is almost absent in the painting, and that is black. Only the very smallest traces of black pigment have been identified, which is really extraordinary considering how dark the painting is. If you look at what appeared to be the blackest parts of the painting, so the underside of the canopy, the bodies of the trains and the press of people waiting to board, Monet has actually used a mixture of different colourful pigments to create optically dark mixtures. So, for example, in the canopy, he's combined red lake, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, artificial ultramarine, viridian and emerald green. And these proportions have been adjusted throughout to make essentially very dark blues and purples. So the painting is actually intensely chromatic. It's a colour palette that mirrors the energy of the station itself. It's modern, it's dynamic, and it's vibrating with sound and movement. In response to seeing Monet's paintings of the Gare St-Lazare, contemporary writer Émile Zola said, "Our artists have to find the poetry in train stations, the way their fathers found the poetry in forests and rivers." Claude Monet is best known for his rural landscapes, his water lilies, his fields, his gardens. While this urban scene, devoid of any natural elements, might seem at odds with this, it's really entirely in keeping with what interested Monet the most, which was capturing ephemeral moments, atmosphere, certain qualities of light that, like smoke, disappear almost as quickly as they arrive.